In the other you're saying this is a big partnership. You got to have a lot of your tribes. You got to have ports. You got to have entities. If you were going to give out blue ribbons or pink ribbons or smiley face stickers or whatever, who's been a good player up to present with you?
Well, I would say it's a pretty big list, candidly. We actually have a process that we're about to try to finalize, which is naming of partners. Yep. And this is one example of something that sounded like a really great idea that's a little more complicated than
Sure.
But there is, in our statute, there's this idea of naming partners. So say, for example, we named Bremerton, which of course would be high on the list, a partner. They would then get a benefit in the state grant and loan programs vis-a-vis other cities for doing good things for Puget Sound. It gets complicated because you have to kind of slice it horizontally or vertically with ports are different than cities. You can't really make them compete. So the long and the short of it, it's a good concept. I think what we're going to end up probably doing is something a little less formal and a little more recognition oriented in terms of, Bill Rock was telling me this story the other day actually so he was the first EPA director in '72, I guess, or '3. And they had this thing where they would go out and they would work with a polluter, a factory or something, and if they got a clean bill of health, they would give them an EPA flag. And Bill thought nobody would ever, it's like probably they want to burn the EPA flag. But instead what happened is they would put the EPA flag above the American flag and above their own flag because they were so excited that they had saved the environment or whatever. So it was just a good example of people really want to do this. I mean, the polling all shows that 97% of the population loves Puget Sound and wants to save it and pass it along to future generations. I haven't actually found the other 3% in my 3 years here, but so needless to say, that's sort of unanimous. The question is, how do you do it? And then the other factors, a lot of people don't know there's a problem. So
how do you educate them?
Yeah.
The education thing, can I just finish that question real quick? So the short answer is we're going to start naming partners or whatever we're going to end up calling it. And I think that will create momentum. I would say here, I think Kitsap County has been very good. The Bremerton's been very good. The Nature Conservancy, Cascade Land, a variety of players like that have done a ton of work in support of us. And we don't want it to be, we want it to incentivize people to want to become a partner, but we don't want to imply that the other people don't like Puget Sound. So that's a little bit of a tension. But the bottom line is there's some people that have really gone above and beyond the call of duty. A lot of those groups up on the canal, the salmon enhancement groups and the Hood Canal Coordinating Council and others are great. And there's a lot of other people around the Sound. People really are into this. So let's go to the communications piece. So obviously, just to sort of compare it, everybody knows there's problems with traffic, right? And yet it took us as a region 9, 10, 11 years to kind of get our act together. It seems like we've kind of moved in that direction recently. And having people, 25% of the public know there's something wrong with Puget Sound is clearly a problem for a whole bunch of reasons. One of which is, will they ultimately support the program? The other one that's maybe even more direct is, will they do things sort of in their day-to-day lives to make decisions that are positive for the Sound if they don't really know that there's an issue with the Sound? So we've done a couple things. We've started this campaign called Puget Sound Starts Here, in which we basically hooked up with 300 local governments that had traditionally done public engagement processes under the Clean Water Act. So basically what happens is Ecology gives all the local governments grants to implement the permit, the National Pollution Discharge and Elimination System permit, NPDES. And they give like 1 or 2% for public engagement. So what typically had happened in the past is that Seattle Public Utility or whoever got the money would put something in their flyer or their bill or whatever, and it was all sort of 150 or 250, or in this case 300 different messages, different things they were asking people to do, and it was pretty ineffective and didn't really focus on anything particularly important and kind of confused everybody. So 3 years ago there were a lot of top 10 lists of the things you can do about Puget Sound. So what we decided to do, at the urging of the counties and the cities, who I give the credit to, and the municipalities that have to comply with the permit. They kind of said, why don't we all do this together, have one overarching campaign, really figure out what matters that we can ask homeowners and local people to do. And we came up with this Puget Sound Starts Here campaign, which is, I think, sort of catching fire, doing well. And we've run ads. We were lucky enough to run the first ad ran the play after the end of the game of the USC-Washington game, which was good timing. And so we've run ads, we've got posters that describe what people can do. I mean, the short, just to cut to the chase on what the asks are in terms of what a person can do, you've got try to use better, less toxic products and things like that in both your yard and in your house. There's one that's my particular favorite on scooping the poop of your pet, which I got asked on the radio at 9 a.m. about, first question a couple weeks ago. Anyway, but the point is that actually does matter. I mean, you would be surprised. It matters for shellfish beds and all that kind of stuff.
I'm not surprised.
And so that's another one. Then you've got wash your car at a car wash where they recycle the water and clean the water. And there are a few other, I think there's 5 total things that people can do in their own lives. And it's, a campaign that people it's resonating with people, kids like it. And I think people are kind of getting the message. The do good in the hood thing was actually a local sort of catchphrase and a group that initiated it, and then we were able to give them a little bit of money to link into the Puget Sound Starts Here campaign, and now they're kind of cross-branded, and all that stuff's a little beyond my pay grade. But the point of it is that we have one single campaign that seems to be resonating. We're trying to bring that up in the financial climate we find ourselves in. That's been a little more challenging than we would have liked, but the bottom line is perhaps the most important thing we do is communicating with the public about what they can do, but also being accurate about that we're asking them to do things that actually matter for the sound. I think those are the 2 big pieces. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Apart from what you mentioned already, what are some of the targets for Hood Canal?
Well, the Hood Canal, I don't have the scientific targets of ours, but obviously one of the big things you're trying to figure out is, with the dissolved oxygen problem in the dead zones, is what's happening there. And it is complicated. I mean, there's been 4 or 5 years of science that have gone into it. The Jan Newton, who you guys probably met, who's done a lot of the research at the Applied Physics Lab, there's a whole bunch of factors, everything from things we can do something about to what the wind direction is at a certain time of the year. I think the basic point from our standpoint with the canal is we have to somehow figure out a way to fix this problem. Second, we have to do as much as we can with the factors that we can control. So basically when you look at a graph of this, there are these events of low dissolved oxygen that kind of rise and fall based on natural issues, seasons. There's a big bathtub effect because it gets very deep and it gets very shallow. And there's some factors that are just going to create the underlying, issue in general. So there's kind of this oscillation on that. What appears to happen is that with excess nutrients, so this is largely a nutrient situation, which isn't saying it's minor, but there's not a huge toxic problem. There's not a bunch of the other factors that are present in the rest of the sound. It's essentially too much nutrients getting in, creating a bloom of algae. The algae dies, sinks, takes the oxygen out of the water, and you have a low dissolved oxygen situation, which kills fish and does all the bad stuff. So the question is, how much of the nutrient loading going into the canal can we do anything about? And the answer is some, and an important amount of some, because usually when we have a dissolved oxygen fish kill event, it just tips into the really bad zone. And so if you could reduce that by, say, 5% or 10%, you could avoid the negative consequence of this kind of natural variability. So that's a very truncated version of the answer. But the basic point is, we are sewering Belfair, if you guys have been there recently. We've got money also, listen, I'm getting all your points, I'm working them in here. In terms of that, but we got money for potlatch. There's just these 3 mini sewer projects from the Skoke Reservation up north. We got money for potlatch, which was the one that is going to now be completed because the state gave it money. so you're starting to get some infrastructure to deal with some of the major loading issues. What we're hoping for ultimately, and this has been more challenging, Chris has followed this, is to actually have models that would be able to, what we've called basically scenario modeling. So you'd say, okay, hypothetically, let's say we sewered or did small sewer systems or whatever from Belfair to Alderbrook. What happens? What is the overall reduction in loading? And would that impact the dissolved oxygen area? Is it a good thing to do for other reasons? And you'd actually be able to know, obviously all models are a model, not reality per se, but you'd have a very good sense and a justification for why you would go invest a significant amount of money in doing something. That's where we need to get to. The modeling part is proven, I think, to be a little more complicated and tougher than people originally thought, but that's kind of the hope we have for the whole sound, is that we're going to know enough, we're going to have these models, we're going to be able to say to people, this isn't some arbitrary 100-foot buffer because we just feel like it or we can't figure out what the right thing to do is, but really be able to say, look, this is what happens, and here's the computer model showing exactly where the loading comes from, here's what happens. And I would just say, having, grown up on the south side of the canal, I mean, there are just a lot of places that I don't care if you have the best new septic in the history of the world, it's not going to solve the problem. You don't have big enough drain fields. You're going to have most of those things, I think all of them now at least, don't do nitrogen and phosphorus. They deal with the bad fecals and those kinds of things. But if it's a nutrient loading game, then we're going to have to think about another solution, and that may in fact being sewering or group sewering of various places around the rest of the canals.
Agriculture too.
Yeah, and agriculture is a significant, I mean, it's a factor, particularly in the Skoke Valley and, that area, so.
The modeling has been in the works for quite a while. And do you have any concerns about striking a balance between not getting stuck on the dime, but not pushing too much and getting into Chesapeake syndrome?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's sort of this point where you know enough to know that in all likelihood this is going to be a good thing to do, and I think getting caught in the last 5% of these debates is problematic, and a lot of people that don't want to do things focus on the last 5% of the debate and don't deal with the underlying premise that whether it's this amount or that amount, it's bad and we need to do something about it, and we're not going to get to the end in 10 years, let alone 1 year, so why don't we start? I think with the canal it's interesting on that point too, because I think a bad outcome here would be to say to all the homeowners, hey guys, you got to do these new septics. Go spend 40 grand or whatever they are, and then say, oh, just kidding. Yeah. That doesn't really work. Now we're going to have you hook up to a sewer. That's the worst possible scenario. Yeah. So my thesis on it is, let's just try to figure out what the right long-term answer is, and then figure out a dynamic to get there and a plan to get there. And there's all kinds of interesting programs. There's the Shore Bank program, where basically they loan people money to do septics or hookups to sewers, and basically you don't have to pay the money back until you sell your house, so you've made a profit on it, and you get to sort of capitalize it that way. There's some pretty creative financing tools and things to make this more doable for people with lower incomes, or anybody for that matter, because these are big numbers. So we're working, on those kinds of things. But the bottom line is, we're not going to lose the canal. We've got to figure out how to deal with this, and we've got to focus again on the pieces that we can control. And I think we're doing that in large part, but we're going to get better, and hopefully these models will kind of be able to help us sell it and explain it to the people out in that area.
You just mentioned the pieces that you can control, and a lot of kind of what you said is very either scientific or the thing you were saying about the education. It's these simple everyday things that are, we can all visualize that and see exactly what that means and how that helps. What about kind of the bigger issues, and there's kind of some long-term kind of consequence to things that you're not directly involved in, but clearly matters to you, and there's things like population increase around the Puget Sound. You can't control that, but you're affected by and connected by it with what your mission is, and things like economic growth, or even the education in this state probably at some point is going to matter to what you're trying to do. And so are you guys involved in lobbying towards that policy, or how are you connected to those kind of policy decisions?
Right, those are, you just named three. I mean, the problem with Puget Sound in a way is that everything is sort of connected to everything else, and it all sort of matters.
Yeah, and I
So-
guess are you feel limited, or are you?
No, we're definitely able to play in those arenas. I mean, so just quickly on the, I mean, so I think the demographic may have changed slightly because of the recession and other things, but basically, you know, we have 4 million people that we're living around here now. We're going to have 1.5 million more in 15 or 20 years. That's a big deal. That's 2 Portlands dropped in the middle of this place. So you got to get ahead of that curve. I mean, that's just essential. That's kind of what the protect the best remaining places with. That also, that issue kind of turns in on stormwater, because obviously if you go out and pave a whole bunch of places and build a whole bunch of new homes and don't do it in a low impact way, you're going to have more runoff. So you've got both the destruction of the actual habitat and then more runoff created by the way you develop and where you choose to develop. So that's a huge issue. That might be, I mean, probably is the essential issue is, can we get ahead of that curve fast enough? Because we could do this for the rest of our lives if we keep creating more problems that we need to fix, right? So that's big. The roads, you know, so that has implications for traffic and the way we do roads, and there's a bunch of obviously issues involving that. And then you also mentioned remind me of what you said.
How education is funded in this state, what we do with building schools and where kids are at.
Right, well,
like that.
And let me get back to one other point. So one thing and I'll come to that. Sure. So if you have 1.5 million more people coming and you don't want them to all live in new sprawl that, you know, takes a long time to drive to, there, you know, the Cascade Land Conservancy and others have been promoting these dense cities. Places like Bremerton, I think, could be a huge asset in terms of building density here. Where you've already got development, let's be more dense there. Let's try to make really livable cities that people are attracted to and want to live in. If we can do that and then preserve the remaining outland places, then we've got a dynamic going that I think is a winner. On the education thing, we have a superstar person that works for us who's leading our education thing, and I was just at a thing a few weeks ago where we've essentially got most of the school districts now trying to come up with a common curriculum on Puget Sound that we're working with them on, so all the kids will learn about what's going on with Puget Sound. It'll be factually based, and again, it won't be sort of all over the map. It'll be a sort of a common curriculum, and a lot of things like that in terms of getting the kids interested in this. They, you know, are the most interested, and I'm a proponent now that I have a 2-year-old. I can already claim that teaching up is a powerful force, on whether it's recycling or whatever it might be. And when your kid comes in and says, you know, Daddy, you're not supposed to do that anymore, or, you know, what if we did this? Right. That has more impact than if, you know, I give some speech or something like that. So again, I think, you know, the trick there is to make sure, and as we've tried to do with this Puget Sound Starts Here campaign, that you're asking people to do things that are both doable, because if you'd ask them to do things that can't be done, then that's stupid, and matter, because people don't want to waste their time. I mean, I had this great story. I'll try to paraphrase the language a little bit, but when I first started this job, I was up at Whidbey Island in Coopville, and I was saying, you know, da-da-da-da, and I kind of said to this guy, you know, assuming we don't come in black helicopters, and assuming we sort of know what we're talking about, and you're convinced that we're asking you to do the most important things, you know, how do you think that'll be received in general? And the guy said, well, you know, I'm out in the beach in February, and it's 39 degrees, and he had a few colorful comments. I'd like to make sure I'm doing the most important thing, so I would welcome that knowledge, right? It was a good point, and I think that's largely been the reception that we've gotten, so we're psyched about that.
But you're going to need to appeal to places like the business community to make these things happen.
Right.
And you're going to have to get involved in politics to make these things happen.
Yeah, and we do that. I mean, you know, we're an interesting organization, and, you know, candidly, I think some of the issues in our recent audit, we didn't do a very good job explaining to the auditor what the distinction between what we're trying to do and what maybe a typical organization would be. So, just as an example, we got hit for sponsoring the Cascade Land Conservancy, and they have this 1,600 person breakfast. We had all our, you know, our logo. We're a brand new entity. It's like the biggest thing that happens. They said all great things about us. We said great things about them, which is all true. And we thought that was, you know, extremely valuable. The auditor didn't see it quite that way, and that's, you know, that's just what it is. But the point is, we, in many respects, are charged. We're small. We're only 36 people. Our job basically is to be the glue, we figure out what to do, and then we try to go get everybody excited and motivated and get them resources to do the things that we need to do. And then as that happens, we hold everybody accountable, and meanwhile, we're trying to get the community excited about doing this. That's not sit in Olympia in your office and look at the wall. That just isn't what this is about. And, you know, so we're very active in that respect. And as long as we, you know, are focused on doing everything from a scientifically credible way, I think people are actually kind of excited that, you know, somebody's out there pushing and trying to get this stuff done. You know, I think our legislative record is very, very good. The fact that when we started this project, the EPA was getting $500,000 for this project. Now they're getting $50 million. And candidly, now every time anybody says the great waters of the United States, Puget Sound has been there. And that was not the case 3 years ago. One of our big things we wanted to do was move from the kids table to the adult table with Chesapeake, the Everglades, and the Great Lakes. There was no reason why we shouldn't have been there because of how great and incredible this estuary is, but we weren't, and now we really are.
Is that something statistics have backed up and put you there, or is it getting the word out and getting the message out?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's, you know, candidly, I think it's the governor came in and put this as one of her top priorities. She's maintained that dedication. The legislature's been there. And we've been able to tell a really good story. When I was on the Senate panel a couple weeks ago, there were 6 or 7 other estuaries, and some were saying, well, can you get rid of the match requirement, and we can't do this, and, you know, New York and others. And we've said, you know what, this is a state priority. We're doing this here, and we need the federal government to help. We're not asking the federal government to take this over or to do everything. And I think that leadership and really being able to show the delegation that the state's serious has been an enormous advantage for us.
Is it recognized, like, having the Nature Conservancy in some of these either nonprofit groups or some of what the cities do? Is Washington different because
yeah, well, let me give you an example. So Lisa Jackson, the head of EPA, was here a couple months ago. And she actually did if you want to look it up, she did an interview on KBLU with Liam Moriarty. And I'm paraphrase here, but she essentially said, she sat down with us for about an hour and a half with Bill Ruckelshaus and then a lot of people from our ecosystem board, which is a lot of state government people, local government people. And she said, look, what I'm struck by here is the buy-in and the excitement of the local elected officials for this plan. We got the mayor here, we got the county executive, this was in Seattle, we'll do the next one here. And she was very struck by, you can listen to the tape, but I think getting that level of involvement and engagement is really different. And candidly, not to take too much credit for this, but in the race to create this action agenda, we had 80 public meetings, we responded to 12,000 comments, we really were open to trying to figure out what the right things to do were. There's just a lot more buy-in, and people basically say we mostly got it right. When we, at the very end, when we were about to finish the agenda, we had these lists of pages 88 through 93 of the plan. We had these lists of what to do. People were saying, well, I think 7 might be a little more important than 8, or, but it was pretty on the margins. There was no big egregious, you missed this completely, or you're totally off base. I think basically people concluded we got it right, and so we just got to now make it happen. That's where we are, and a lot's going on. So that's what we're trying to figure out.
Any other questions?
Well, I told somebody on my blog that if I got a chance, I'd ask you about the immigration issue. So I want to couch that around.
I'm going to go no comment on that.
Good time to take it.
Let me put it into context for a second.
Yeah.
You interact with the Puget Sound Regional Council on issues of population, transportation, and all the things they're dealing with, and how do you work with them or anybody else that's doing these regional planning things? And second of all, do you know what percentage of our population that you were talking about, 1.5 million people, are going to be maybe immigrants from another part of the country or another country? I'm not necessarily speaking of
from outside the area,
yeah. Just immigrants to our area. If we were just growing within our own area, that's one thing. But so I'm kind of wondering if you're thinking about, if you're involved in immigration policy in any way.
Kids, immigration, yeah. I don't mean to diminish that. I think, and I can get the data to you exactly. I think the population growth rate of the current populace in the state of Washington, in the Puget Sound region, is relatively flat. So I think most of the immigration is coming from the other parts of the country. Seattle, Bremerton, everywhere, fairly popular place for obvious reasons, relatively good job market comparatively, et cetera. So, which is one big argument about why we need to keep Puget Sound great, is because a lot of people want to come here, and a lot of smart people and a lot of smart companies and all those kinds of things. If we lose that, if you're competing for the top 0.1% of the engineers, computer engineers or something, you know, those guys are thinking about, you know, can I go snowboarding there and go water skiing and things like, you know, those kind. So, you know, San Francisco, Seattle, Austin, you know, a few places like that. We've got to maintain, and the Sound is obviously the central resource that is very attractive to people. I was sitting in the Pike Place Market the other day looking out, and you just, it's striking. All the cruise ships coming and all those kinds of things. So I think that's right in terms of I'll get you the numbers on. And the second question, I met with Bob Druhl last week, the head of the PSRC, the Puget Sound Regional Council, which is in charge of the growth planning for the 4 counties. And we're very connected to them. We're actually thinking about doing something we're back to your partner idea, something very affirmative on stormwater with those 4 counties. That will be a complete partnership. Obviously, we pay a lot of attention to their 2040 plan for growth and the variety of other plans. They are paying a lot of attention to the action agenda. There's a lot of things in the action they're talking about implementing parts of their plan. And there'll be, as they update their plans, it'll be the other way around too. But that just gets back to your point about growth. I mean, I think that figuring out how we're going to live here in a way that doesn't harm the Sound and doesn't take up all the great places that we have out in the wildlands is the trick, and we've got to work really hard together. So, I mean, the short answer is we work them a lot. We can do more, and I think in some ways lining up funding and priorities around, but to the extent we can say it's in this plan, and this plan, the 2040 plan, the action agenda, the salmon plan, and sort of have overwhelming force, I think we'll be able to get some of these points across.
You know, your point about, putting people in the places that are maybe already developed and increasing the density there, I think is kind of the goal that everybody wants to do, but a lot of times it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
People maybe don't want to live in the city. So, I mean, do you have any strategies or?
I think, I mean, this, life is as we're learning with the golf, right? I mean, you could plan for the rest of your life about what to do with the golf, and then something like that happens, and it's all, it's a totally different equation. I would say that, things such as gas prices and, have created a dynamic in which people really, not because of the good of their souls, so to speak, but it costs a lot of money, and it takes a lot of time to commute an hour every day, and at some point people say this isn't worth it. And I think that what Gene Duvernoy and those guys at the Cascade Land Conservancy, I think, rightly focus on is it can't be just, it's not good to go live in the country. It's got to be something extremely appealing is going on in these downtown cores. They've got this idea that's sort of a hybrid that is a little controversial, but conceptually what it is these, what they call rural villages, where you'd actually have, so say in Port Orchard or somewhere, where it's not a real big city, but it's some place where you sort of say, let's have townhomes and a bunch of amenities in one particular place, and then preserve all the remaining part of the area. Some developers are doing that, and I think that's smart. I think that's another point in this direction. The other big factor in a bill that we're probably going to work on a lot with PSRC and the Cascade Land Conservancy is the transfer of development rights bill. This is this concept where basically a developer would be able to buy development rights off, say, a farm. So say somebody in a downtown wanted to build a 25-story building and the zoning only let you have a 10-story building, you could buy the remaining development rights by acquiring the development capacity of a farm. So the farm never converts to homes, you get more people downtown. So there's a lot of, tools, and I think, but you're raising a good point, which is this isn't easy, and you kind of have this sort of shift in attitude. I do sense that people are getting more excited about living in urban areas in many cases, because I think we're getting better urban areas that are more attractive for people to move to, and that's obviously going to be a part of the equation.
Port Gamble is what you meant, not Port Orchard.
Yeah.
Is it?
Well, I
don't know.
was actually thinking about Fort Taylor, but
But
Port
there is
Gamble,
very
Port
similar
Gamble is a
things.
very good
example
example.
of it, yeah.
It's a very, very good example, and
Something like
I've talked a lot with those guys. I've talked with, you know, I think Steve Bauer was quite hesitant at the beginning. I think he's become a proponent of it. I mean, the concept of it is you'd have a destination place where, and they have an idea about a university and a whole bunch of other interesting concepts, but from the sound standpoint, you'd have a, basically, let's say, I can't remember exactly the acreage, but it's a lot of acres.
6,000 acres.
Yeah. Instead of developing what they could do under the current zoning, which is develop a lot of it, you'd really focus development, you'd really focus the infrastructure, you wouldn't have to pipe all the water, you wouldn't have to do reclaimed water, you'd protect, they have like 3,000 feet of beach or more. It's amazingly possible, and the most important thing about the Port Gamble project is there's one owner.
Yep.
So you don't have all the ownership complications that you have in other settings. So I mean, as I said to those guys, if we can't pull that one off, you know, this isn't going to happen. So I think we got to work on those kinds of projects. And again, I think that mitigation, a few other topics, if we can land a couple of these and show it is real, then I think it's going to be a movement.
And that's what gets your flag.
Yeah, they're going to get a flag.
Yeah.
Kitsap County and those guys will get a flag, no question about it.
Well, thank you guys.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Taking the hour we said we would.
Hey, thanks so much. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Help. Yeah. Unless anyone else has one?
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Jim, I didn't even say hello, Frank, nice to meet you, and appreciate that.
Good to see you.
So
You guys wanna
get-
keep
get
this thing?
John,
I think we would.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, we'll be a
Okay.
guy,
Is that
keep
on?
everybody informed.